Please be aware this will be a spoiler-filled discussion. Hello, and welcome to the Minority Arts Appreciation Society, where we're ticking all the boxes and providing the much-needed minority perspective in popular internet discourse. I'm Matty, and I lead the film discussions.
I'm Josh, and I lead the music discussions.
If you're one of those idiots, those fools that is listening and subscribed, please do, and like the video and follow us on whatever platform you're listening to us on if you're not listening on YouTube. And our social medias are linked in the description if you want to follow those and keep up to date with episodes. And we're joining you today with a kind of new film review of Josephine Decker's Shirley. This was released earlier this year, but with the kind of rocky release schedule of the COVID era, which we'll get into further in a second, and also just the fact that there was other films we wanted to talk about at the time. We didn't get a chance to talk about it when it came out, but we're talking about it now because I know Josh loves Elizabeth Moss, and I thought this film looked really cool, and I wanted to watch it, and I thought it looked like it had a lot to talk about. So yeah, but enough on Shirley for now. Right now, the major news at the moment is that Warner Brothers have released their 2021 movie release schedule, and they're going to be doing a model that they call a day and date model, where they release all of their films onto HBO Max at the same time that they're released in theaters. Of course, HBO Max is a US exclusive service. You have to be like either connected through like I don't really know exactly how it works, but it is extremely difficult to get it if you are anywhere but the United States.
What is the VPN thing?
That's like I think you would need a VPN and
fake hacker shit.
Yeah. So like it's not a huge deal over here in a weird way, but seeing as the United States is apparently the cultural center of the world, especially where films are concerned.
I mean, these are American films, so I mean.
No, no, for sure. but you know what I'm saying, like.
Look, man, when fucking these French niggas start like giving us films, like every now and then, and not just at random festivals in Canada, then I'll be
know
more,
what you're saying.
Infuriated. But that wasn't a real point. I'm just...
So I think what this is kind of fitting into, obviously, is the whole decline of the cinema experience that's kind of been going on and for years and years now. And films aren't real this year. Is the decision I've made. Like, we're not going to be doing a top 10 films of the year episode like we did for 2019, just because I don't think it's fair. I don't think like I don't want to see like every film that's been released in a year, but I want to give everything a fair shot, and I don't think doing a top 10 this year would be giving things a fair shot. But anyway, I guess with this, I like the convenience of being able to watch things at home. I mean, this is if I was in the United States, but that's if it's at a like a reasonable pricing margin. There was that whole thing with Mulan earlier this year where it was like fucking nearly $40 to watch it.
That was absurd. That was genuinely
it was obscene.
From Mulan.
Yeah, for Mulan.
I wouldn't pay that money to see Spider-Verse. You're charging it for Mulan.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything you could like charge me. I would never pay that much money to watch a film in my own house. I would never pay that much money to watch a film in the cinema. But I mean, anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, that's I'm getting those like rumbly chairs of wine and dining and the waiters that come up and give you food in the middle of Fast and Furious 5. Pay good money for that.
All right, now you got me convinced. So I don't see this so much as a blow to cinemas as I do a kind of inevitable form of adaptation to the pandemic, and I honestly think like no matter how we handle cinemas throughout the pandemic, I feel like their fate, either way, whether they live or die, was sealed before the pandemic started.
I do totally agree. I think this was like an inevitable conclusion of the rise of streaming, and um the pandemic only accelerated it. I think
Yeah.
what's funny about I think what's funny about this is um in my opinion, the only thing that was keeping cinemas alive for the past decade were Marvel films. Those
Yeah.
are the only films that reliably brought in a shit ton of money, which justified cinemas pretty much. Like those are the films that everyone and their mom went to see at the cinema. And like I'm cinema fans, you know, the Kino Warriors hate this, like because of the structure where we need 3 Marvel films a year because it's the only thing that reliably makes all the money.
Yeah.
We've seen like, you know, huge generic reboot franchises like Godzilla and what was the Paramount Monster Universe of the Mummy? Which one was trying to do a Monster
The
Universe thing?
Dark Universe.
The Dark Universe.
I think that was Warner Brothers as well, actually.
Yeah, every studio trying to do their own MCU and you know, and Kino Warriors have hated this, and I wonder if now that Tenet has successfully killed cinema, maybe we'll see like there'll be less of a worry about having to fund those types of movies to make money, and like maybe when it all moves to streaming, we'll see like more back to like the 90s of taking risk on kind of more interesting films, you know, because that model, it doesn't matter anymore where the new Marvel film comes out anymore because it's the same, you're watching it in your living room. And I wonder if the films that get really big on Netflix, like the weird concept horror films and like platform, I wonder if those are going to make like a real kind of comeback with this kind of move. I'm just wondering if this will kill Marvel basically.
Wow, that's so true, actually. I hadn't thought about it from that angle because I think, yeah, the obvious direction to immediately go in with this is that cinemas are slowly declining, but I think I do see them as having the potential to close their doors. Like, you know, there was recently a major cinema company that went bust in the United Kingdom and it closed a bunch of cinemas, but that wasn't. I know I know all cinemas are like a good thing if you're talking about them just purely from a like film appreciation perspective, not like a business or like a social perspective. But you know, I didn't really care when a chain shut down. I do feel like there are enough significant people who care about the movie going experience that cinemas will survive. And I feel like at the end of the day, when you have things like this, all it really does is, like you said, is open up the game once again to free for all of the movie going experience and like the films that get into cinemas. I think the major concern with cinemas is, and the long term concern with cinemas is that simply the way they make money just isn't that sustainable, and that is what has to change if we're gonna save them, if they need saving, that is, because the fact that, you know, on the opening weekend studios take more of a cut of per ticket sales than they do than the weeks following is killing cinemas. That's what's killing cinemas. It's the fact that the amount of money they make off of films is so minimal. The profit margins in these places are absolutely pathetic. You know, I mean, it's a joke that the fucking popcorn has to be so expensive because otherwise, literally, the place would close down. That's the problem with cinemas, and I don't know. It's such a quirk of capitalism, I guess, that it's like, oh no, Suicide Squad is on HBO Max. Cinemas are dead, and we don't examine like, hey, why are cinemas struggling when the actual film industry, I mean, they're not doing great, but they're not this year, but before this they were doing just fine, and cinemas have not been doing just fine for a while.
Yeah, I don't know too much about that business side of cinemas, so I can't comment on that. But I think it is
Mm.
an astute observation. But I'm sort of, I guess I have two points to make. In terms of me kind of being fine with this, 3
Yeah.
points even. Uh, First, I think the attempts that cinema made, by cinema I mean theaters, made to stay alive in the past 2 decades have been utterly pathetic and degrading. From the 3D era of every film trying to look like Avatar by James Cameron and cramming weird 3D into it was pointless. It was just a desperate grab at more money to keep these things alive. To the era of a slew of kind of brand MCU lookalike films, huge spectacle experiences. I think this was just embarrassing, and hopefully it will go away with this going away, cinema going away. Second of all, I remember I heard someone make an argument that one thing to worry about with theaters dying is it was a good place to go experience film as it's meant to be experienced. So like, the next kind of filmmakers of the age won't necessarily have the same opportunity to experience art in the ways that you would have, in the 20th century.
Yeah.
And at this point as well, I don't fully buy it. The films that tend to get a mass release in theaters are generally, the Hollywood schlock, which every now and then pumps out a Mad Max Fury Road, but for the most part, it's the schlock. If you're living in the middle of nowhere and like, you know, some inner city
Cinemas have been
America,
dead for a long time. Yeah.
yeah, you have to go to like some off the beaten track indie cinema to see something like artsy or interesting, or they just don't get a wider release. So again, I don't. In terms of distribution, I don't think that this is like gonna gatekeep anyone away from films more than the usual structure of wide releases has. And then third of all, I don't think cinemas are going to completely go away. I just think they're going to become novelty experiences. I think there will still be cinemas, but they're going to be more kind of a novelty thing, and they're going to play, kind of like the independent cinemas you have. I don't think they'll be in shopping centers anymore necessarily, which has always been kind of just spectacle, just to see the new Star Wars film. I don't think this is that big of a. I'm kind of excited for this 21st century model of distribution and like how it will change art. So I'm kind of embracing this. I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm weirdly okay with it.
That's a hot ass take. But I totally see where you're coming from. I do think it, like, I don't hold the same position, but I do see how it could definitely open up new doors.
I mean, I'm thinking of Ending Things as a film that couldn't have come out in cinemas. No one would fund it for cinemas, and you had to go to Netflix to get it funded. And Charlie Coffin's been really struggling with funding films. That's why you have to pick a film with like 3 sets on it. And I'm just hoping more filmmakers like Coffin get a chance to speak in this new age.
No, for sure. I think one thing people say though is just that there was a time where he could have, and I would agree with that.
Can't turn the wheels back on capitalism. So
no, exactly. Awesome. Okay, so that brings us on to our Shirley review with the preamble wrapped up. Shirley is a film adapted from a novel, which is a semi-autobiographical account of novelist Shirley Jackson's life in a particular phase of her life, approaching her death at the young age of 48. She is one of the most acclaimed horror writers of all time, producing novels like The Haunting of Hill House, which has been adapted into an extremely popular Netflix show, and has really clear influence on authors like Stephen King. Just to set the scene, however, I do feel like if you're listening to this episode, you have seen the film and you're at least somewhat familiar with who Shirley Jackson is. So essentially, throughout the course of this film, we spend the majority of our time with the entry character Rose, as her husband essentially works with Stanley, Shirley's husband, in university where he worked in real life, and Rose develops a relationship with Shirley as she remains in the home. So the film opens with our entry character Rose reading the novel that propelled Shirley Jackson to significance, and that's The Lottery. She's enthralled, but one significant detail here is that Rose is a newcomer, unfamiliar with her works, and this opens up the film to an aspect of their relationship that I think really works, and that's that Rose sees the genius in her works, but her drive in the film is never from an obsession over Shirley's work. There's very little preconceptions to her, so there's this instantaneous lack of regard for her grandeur as an artist, because at this time she was extremely popular.
It's like her ambivalence towards Shirley Jackson that makes Shirley Jackson so attracted to her.
Exactly. And this is shown front and center when Rose and Fred arrive at the house, and there is a party, and the majority of the party is crowded around Shirley, waiting to hear what her next novel is about. But back to setting the scene, Rose and Fred arrive at the house, like I said, and Stanley, her husband, is immediately warm and inviting. He's a very friendly character, and I want to talk about Michael Stuhlbarg quite a lot while we discuss Shirley. And when Rose meets Shirley, Shirley pulls out a very dismissive, almost kind of not like the other girls line on her, to immediately put her in her place. As I watched the film, I sort of felt a level of disconnect between my expectations of the story versus its actual content. And I think that came from the level of attention paid to Rose.
Yeah, like you expect it to be completely centered on Shirley, but our POV character is, what's her name?
Rose.
Is Rose. Thank you. Actually, it reminded me a lot of, I'm thinking of Ending Things. When that film, the kind of reality of the female lead characters is kind of questioned by both the source material and the film itself. And the same with this, how in the book, Rose and her boyfriend are like completely fictitious machinations of the author used as a device to explore what Shirley Jackson might have been like and the relationship with her husband. So knowing that, I discovered that after watching the film, similarly has a weird sort of, the Rose is purely a device to get to know Shirley more. It's purely just, this is the audience, and also this will explore Shirley's sexuality and feelings towards femininity and things like that.
I think that reveals really interesting.
An odd approach to a biopic.
Definitely, I think it reveals very interesting things about this film in how it went against that. Again, these are obviously still fictitious people, but I do feel like the film breaks from the novel to an extent in that regard. So to get into my overall thoughts of the film, my expectation was of a film centered around a character study of Shirley, particularly in her idiosyncrasies and intricacies. And I do think the film still does this, but it goes a lot further. This still feels like Shirley's story, but that's because it's Shirley that draws a character out of Rose. And that dismissive line in their first meeting is proven wrong by this relationship in itself. And that's what the film is about to me. The way this era puts certain women on a pedestal, extracting their culture and their value while simultaneously extracting their soul and destroying them. Shirley Jackson's own life was proof of that fact. She was treated as like a problem case, filled with drugs that were considered acceptable at the time, as many women were, very normal issues that were treated as extremely pathological because of how society saw women at the time. And as a result of this, Rose's character almost becomes this beacon of hope by the end. She assumes a relationship very, very similar to Shirley's by the end of the film, with her adopting a very disaffected position to her husband, but with the distinction of a new life and perhaps a different time to the one that produced the Shirley we see in the film's opening moments. And so the film, for me, kind of becomes this wholly authentic, almost love letter to the women of this period and the trauma they all went through and the people it produced.
Yeah, I definitely think if you view Odessa Young's character as a kind of almost rhetorical literary device of becoming even more fictitious because you're placing her in the context of a biopic, that character really does become operative of kind of just a general symbol of like the woman that Shirley influenced of her writing, and the type of the empowerment that she perhaps gave them with explorations of these themes of troubled women in a society that doesn't really care about them. And in what you said about how feeling that it was a strange approach to a biopic with Shirley being a not the point of view character, I can see that, but I do think this is kind of a classic storytelling structure. It reminds me a lot of The Great Gatsby, which is a character study of Jay Gatsby, but told through like Tobey Maguire or Nick, if you read books. So I do kind of dig that aspect of it, and I think I did enjoy the film. It's really inconsistent at points. For example, I think the husband, Michael Stuhlbarg, his character is probably the most complicated character in this entire film. And really such a exciting and contentious performance. And he's kind of the big man in the film who's going to play the role of elements of the toxic patriarchal environment they're living in, which the film is critical of. And then you have Percy Jackson, Logan Lerman's character, who's kind of another one of this. Like, if, like what you said, we're taking these as kind of mirrors, the young couple versus the new couple, and how the next generation might be different because of Shirley's influence. Logan Lerman's such a fucking boring character, such like a boilerplate, almost cartoonish, like bad husband guy, which was really disappointing. And that kind of fluctuation between quite excellent writing and then quite lazy writing was very confusing for me.
I think that's
not a big part of the film. I just don't like Logan Lerman. That's what I'm saying, really.
No, I think the film's biggest. See, I'm really mixed on it because I feel like the film is basically admitting, look, we hate this guy and we hate everything he represents, which is the apathetic approach to life and like an apathetic approach to the women around you, in that he's just so careless and thoughtless, so we're not even going to pay any attention to him. There might be something there, like, that the film just isn't concerned with shining a light on, but at the same time, this is a film where it's essentially you're spending it with these four characters. It's Shirley, it's Rose, it's Stanley, and it's Fred. And Fred, Logan Lerman's character, is just far less interesting than anyone else. And it feels like you've got a house on four foundations and one of them is kind of not quite right.
Yeah, and especially with Michael Stuhlbarg's character, he's a real person. Stanley Edgar Hammond. Like they put so much work to make him like a real person, where he is bad, very bad. He's still like real. Like, he has values and things he cares about and gets excited about. And I really liked his character by the end of the film, not in like a real way of like, if I met him on the street, I'd be like, I like the way you treat your wife. But in like a literary way, he's so well developed, and man, I adore his dynamic with Shirley. I think with that couple, what I really like is you completely understand why they are together. They are so perfect for each other. He's just very abusive and horrible, and he needs to not be that. That's really bad. But the film does a good job of showing like how like they make sense as a couple dynamically.
Yeah.
And that makes the situation more complicated and painful. Which they put none of that effort with Logan Lerman's character. And Odessa Young's character, I don't know. Like, I feel like very, very endearing performance. I love Odessa's performance in this film. But I do feel like her role was just to be very like just to be the
Wide-eyed.
lens that wide-eyed, the lens that we see Shirley's brilliance through, very similar to Nick from The Great Gatsby. And it was really interesting when he started delving into the kind of blossoming of a romantic / sexual relationship between them, which kind of doesn't go anywhere. I was hoping that would go further. I guess then maybe it would become Shirley Jackson fanfic. But
that's the thing. Yeah,
I was really into that when it started happening. That was really compelling. That was when her character, Odessa Young's character, was at its most compelling. That was like things got very complicated there, and it kind of goes away. I don't know. I feel like there was. I wish this film to extend threads further, such as exploring more Shirley Jackson's and Stanley Hyman's relationship. I would have loved to see more of that, like more of their dynamic, because it's so fun to watch together, kind of at each other's necks, and then yeah, maybe more of that romance, which I was really enjoying. I wish those were strung out a bit more.
Yeah, okay, definitely two things from what you just said that I want to talk about is like, firstly, with Odessa Young and Rose, it's an interesting problem because for me, like I was saying, what this film is about is what this time did to women and how it framed women, and the film is about taking that apart. And there are other things going on around that, but they're usually about that element, including things like Stanley's character. And so you have a really interesting problem there, because I think Rose is a victim of this problem, and so you never really get a strong sense of who she is and how she like has fun and how she communicates. Like you do because the film changes her, but for a long part of the film it's about getting her there through Shirley's eyes, and I personally find it compelling enough in their dynamic to not mind that Rose isn't the strongest character, especially when you have like such larger than life performances going on from Elizabeth Moss, and to an extent Michael Stuhlbarg. But I do see why for some people it just might be too much the other way, where Rose is, as a protagonist and as an entry point character, there just isn't enough there.
Yeah, it is hard to compete with Elizabeth Moss pretending to be a witch and Michael Stuhlbarg pretending to be Dionysus. That is hard.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think it brings it. The script does bring out Shirley's excellence with Rose's passivity, and I personally always find it an incredibly charming dynamic of kind of, especially when there's a slightly romantic element of the kind of more naive person versus a like more wild thing. I know it's such a cliche, but I am always charmed. But secondly, yeah, exactly, manic pixie dream girl, but make it gay, and you've got me.
I don't think that fixes the trope. Is the issue?
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Where was I going? And secondly, it's the I know this is the Elizabeth Moss movie, but I think Stanley's performance might be my absolute favorite. He is an incredible actor, Michael Stuhlbarg, and in this film he has such a wonderful balance of charming and established gentleman. In that first scene, God, he's just so charismatic when you see him welcoming to the party, and he's the perfect contrast to Shirley's brittleness, in his kind of drunken dad-esque state. But he is so incredible later on, being like the other side and the dark side of that, because I think they are two sides of the same coin, where you have that kind of overbearing charisma, and then on the other side of it you have the manipulating and conniving and, you know, at points in the film openly creepy and exploitative. And yes, so he like perfect. And I think, what, again, to relate this back to what I think the film's about, I think he's such an amazing character for showing I think just exactly how women are forced into the positions that people like Shirley are, because they are taken in by the promises of masculinity, and as all of societies are, by attaching traits to like genders, we kind of create these dynamics that become very attractive and kind of inevitable in a way. And then what happens then is you have the negative aspects of essentialism, where there will always be, again, the other side of the coin, that means that charisma is part of control, because he is the charismatic one, he is the person that goes out, and Shirley is the one that stays at home and functions for him.
His character, the way they've constructed this kind of fictional version of Stanley Edgar Hyman really reminded me of Stanley Kowalski from Streetcar Named Desire, performed by Marlon Brando in that film.
That's exactly what I was going for.
Yeah, I think when dealing with issues of the ills of the patriarchy, it does you a service to not make cartoonish villainous men, but make real people, because that's the people we deal with in real life. And with making characters like Stanley Kowalski and now Edgar Hyman, it kind of has this really interesting tension between like class and gender issues, where both Stanley and Edgar are quite horrible men. Stanley Kowalski from Streetcar is lecherous and abusive, and Stanley Edgar Hyman from this film is also very lecherous and creeps on the young woman in the house, and cheats on his wife, and gaslights her, and a litany of many other crimes. But then you also get this dynamic of Stanley Kowalski's Polish. So there's a part of that film where Blanche is like explicitly racist and classist towards him, and you feel bad for him. And but he's also this like hideous, toxic
monster
man. Same with Stanley Edgar Hyman in this film. With his him being Jewish and his kind of class consciousness and his anger at how easy the Percy Jackson kid gets it, going through life, and just creating complicated, crunchy characters that deal with like talking about misogyny alongside class, and how these lines aren't so clear cut, is where effective critique comes, I think, and where this film really shines, partially.
And yeah, I think that leads us perfectly on to talking about Elizabeth Moss's titular performance. Do you want to kick it off?
This is my first Elizabeth Moss movie. I didn't get to see The Invisible Man. I think that her portrayal of Shirley Jackson was excellent. And she really looks like the woman herself, amazingly. Like, they look so alike.
Strikingly, yeah.
I wish the script gave her more human moments. A lot of the time she was this like mystical creature, which I think when writing about like a woman with depression, you want to avoid. I'm not a woman with depression, so it might not be my place to say it, but I think such a character would benefit from avoiding kind of a fantastical view of it. I think a more harsh look at the mundanity and pain of what life must have been like for Shirley Jackson as she gradually becomes more and more agoraphobic, I would have appreciated. I wish her performance made me feel more uncomfortable rather than roused by how mystical she is. I kind of wish the film went darker with how she was written, just to get some of that reality. But I do think it is a really bloody good, like what Moss does, the material she's given is really bloody good and really entertaining. And that's just I did really enjoy her performance. But yeah, that's just my gripe.
No, I do get that. The film, like, especially with what this film is about, you never would want it to dip into this romanticization, because it's exactly what this film's against, is just this like pedestalization of like, this person is amazing and we're going to like medicate all of their wacky intricacies that make them that way, and then just kind of fit them into society wherever we can, and give them a husband so he can just sort of work on her as he goes. But I think there are a couple of things that mean that the film never goes too far into that. And I think like that for one is the first time that you see her leave the house in the film when they go out to buy clothes. And like, because I feel like that moment where you see her walking out of the house with Rose is quite powerful for like seeing her not even really overcome her, because it's never how it is. It's never this movie-esque like, you know, I feel great and I can finally do this. It's this painful, slow experience, and she struggles at the store as well. And also there's the moments at the party where she sees her husband, just the entire sequence of her at the dean's party, with some exceptions, like when she pours the wine on the sofa, which is quite fun and like charming character stuff,
and pretending to be a witch and hexing someone.
Yeah, which is very like kind of head in the clouds.
Very good. I love that. I love that moment.
It's so good.
Very Willy Wonka. She's very Willy Wonka.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Oh my god. So like I was saying, I feel like that entire sequence at the dean's party is quite humanizing for her, because I think it's the first time that you see her deal with her husband's extramarital affairs in a way that's just sad, in a way that you just see her deal with it in the way any person in her position would have actually just sitting there in silence, knowing that there's nothing she can do about it. And I really like that. I really like that about that scene, because not only does it perfectly like articulate the dynamics of the day, especially with how like men are allowed to be these kind of like gallivanting sort of magnetic people, and their wives just sit there and watch them as they clearly like flirt around with people, but also just because I think it's so important for seeing how it actually plays out and how horrible a man Stanley actually is. So I just think those are two really important moments for the film.
Yeah, and I think while I do love all of her Willy Wonka moments, you know, I love when she pretends to eat a poisonous mushroom to make Rose's bug out. I like when she's destroying shit in the house out of anger. I love all of that. But yeah, I would have liked more human moments and more human moments. And one human moment I did really like was right at the end when she's like standing at the edge of the cliff where the woman had committed suicide. The woman she's watching a story about, Rose is about to commit suicide, and then Rose isn't there. It's just Shirley there thinking about suicide. That was a very, very touching, human, vulnerable moment. I really like that. Okay, one question I have for you is, where do you land on how the film is trying to present Shirley and Stanley's marriage by its conclusion? There are kind of two scenes in this film that are really telling and maybe weird, or not weird, but like complicate this as a simple feminist statement about how shit Stanley is. There's a scene at the party where after this awkward, her sitting there watching her husband gallivant, her kind of triumphant moment is dragging the woman Stanley's having an affair with down and saying, "You will never be enough for him. He will get bored of you." And while that could be read as kind of, this man will use you and then throw you away, it's also kind of this thing of, he is a wildly interesting man, and I'm an interesting woman, and that is why we are married, and you are. That's why you're in his DMs, and he's in my house. The current meme, and it is a weird. In that moment, like you really feel that she loves Stanley, and I feel like the film plays that as a triumphant moment, and it doesn't feel like a sad moment. It feels like, yeah, she is good to Stanley. And then there's also the ending. I love the ending of this film, where it's just a close-up shot of Elizabeth Moss's face, waiting, and you don't know what she's waiting for. And then behind her, you see Stanley take a deep breath and say, like, it's brilliant. And it's this amazing scene where he kind of waltzes up to her and they just dance and drink at the success of her novel. This is real, like I really ended this like, man, what a great romance. I love this couple. I'm so happy they have each other.
I know what you mean.
I knew that was so bizarre. And I'm not saying this is bad. It's just, it's complicating. And I wonder, like, as the woman of the podcast, how do you feel about this? How just almost like life affirming the romances by this.
So the way I see it, it's kind of like what you said, where Stanley is horrible and I don't like him, and like as a real person, if this were a real relationship, like I would say, you know, get out and never look back. And I'm not saying that in the film's language, Shirley shouldn't get out and never look back, but I think these are more moments of, I guess, the few cases where Shirley has, in some sense, autonomy. And I don't think it's good autonomy, but I think for me, what I'm seeing here is a story just giving Shirley a break to some extent. And like, I think that is important for people like that, for stories. What I'm glad about with this film is I feel like it never goes down into threads that are just immediately predictable. Like I said, in real life, I would want Shirley to leave this marriage, but I'm glad that this isn't a film where at the end we see Shirley come running out of the house towards Rose's car, and you know, she says, wait, I'm coming with you, and they go off together as friends or as lovers or whatever. I kind of like that we're left with some idea that the situation isn't completely fixed, in that Rose is still with Fred, her completely useless husband, but somewhat empowered. And I think Shirley has kind of benefited from that relationship in a symbiotic way almost. But that said, Stanley is a lot worse. And
I think there's also a biographical strength to writing a marriage like that in that way. It's very similar to you know, a Ted Hughes Sylvia Plath dynamic. You know, that it's no secret that Ted Hughes was probably quite abusive. It's probably not a coincidence that all of his wives killed themselves. But it would do Sylvia Plath, and I assume Shirley Jackson, a disservice as people to not kind of glean into what they saw in these men in the first place. It's clear that they obviously loved these men while they were with them, and while that doesn't condone the men's actions, I think it does do the real people behind these stories a service in trying to tackle the complexity of that. So I actually do like the tonally dissonant moments of this, and that's one of my favorite endings of a film in recent memory. I really adore the ending of this.
So that's all our thoughts on Shirley. So time to get into our recommendations. I'll go first. I will keep this brief. I would give this a decent to strong recommend. I think this is a really important film in that it's reflecting on an issue that I think people forget is as timely as it can be. That things done to women like this were truly awful. And I think looking back and being as affectionate and as empathetic with these people as possible is an extremely important thing for art like this to do. So I would give this a really decent, strong recommend, because I think it achieves in an extremely entertaining and artistic way in that regard.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd give it a decent recommend. I think it gives a very incisive view of kind of the gendered environment of the time Shirley Jackson was writing in, and it's a very potent and jubilant presentation of that literary figure. And biopics, especially in music, are typically awful. I usually hate biopics. So this goes in the ranks of biopics that are actually quite good. And I do think at points it can get a bit cliche with especially with the cutaway moments where it's showing like a dramatization of the book she's writing, with like hazy shots of a woman running through the forest. It was shot a bit television to me, but other than moments like this is mostly an excellent film, and I did really enjoy it. So I stand by Matthew. Decent recommend.
Sweet. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that discussion. Josh, what are we going to be talking about next week?
We will be discussing Haim's 2013 debut. 2013, right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember because I remember when the song came out. Days Are Gone. So yeah, be sure to listen along, come around. That should be a fun discussion. Goodbye.
All right, thank you very much for listening.